Folks, it is my deep conviction, and has been for many, many years, that the only hope for America is the recovery of our basic moral and spiritual foundations. The basic Judeo-Christian, rooted in the Bible, foundational principles of American society. Now, if we're going to do this, I believe one of the best places to start is to pay heed to the founding fathers, because they warned us about what would happen to us Americans if we did what we've done. That is, to remove the Bible right out from under the feet of the American people as the basic foundational moral and spiritual platform for American society. Jedediah Morse was one of the great founding fathers, and one time he said this: "In proportion as the genuine effects of Christianity are diminished in any nation, either through unbelief or the corruption of its doctrines or the neglect of its institutions, in the same proportion will the people of that nation recede from the blessings of genuine freedom and approximate the miseries of complete despotism." End quote. Absolutely true. Thomas Jefferson said this: "And can the liberties of a nation be thought secure when we have removed their only firm basis, a conviction in the minds of the people that those liberties are the gift of God?" Founding Father George Mason, Virginian, actually the author of the Declaration of Rights of Virginia, dated in January of 1776, George Mason wrote this: "No free government or the blessing of liberty can be preserved to any people but by a firm adherence to justice, moderation, temperance, frugality, and virtue, and by frequent recurrence to fundamental principles." Patrick Henry, 5-term governor of Virginia, he said one time, "The great pillars of all government are virtue, morality, and religion. This is the armor, my friend, and this alone that renders us invincible." On May 17, 1776, Dr. John Witherspoon, again the Presbyterian minister president of the College of New Jersey, who personally educated 87 of the founding fathers, said this: "In times of difficulty and trial, it is in the man of piety and inward principle that we may expect to find the uncorrupted patriot, the useful citizen, and the invincible soldier. God grant that in America true religion and civil liberty may be inseparable, and that the unjust attempts to destroy the one may in the issue tend to the support and establishment of both." Sam Adams put it like this: "A general dissolution of principles and manners will more surely overthrow the liberties of America than the whole force of the common enemy. While the people are virtuous, they cannot be subdued. But when once they lose their virtue, they will be ready to surrender their liberties to the first external or internal invader. If virtue and knowledge are diffused among the people, they will never be enslaved. This will be their great security." What wisdom they had. President Andrew Jackson, the 19th century, of course: "No nation has lost its liberty until it has first become corrupt." The great Massachusetts Senator Daniel Webster put it like this: "If we abide by the principles taught in the Bible, our country will go on prospering and to prosper. But if we and our posterity," that's us, "neglect the Bible's instruction and authority, no man can tell how sudden a catastrophe may overwhelm us and bury all of our glory in profound obscurity." Noah Webster, the great educator, said this in 1829 in a letter to retired President James Madison. The Christian religion in its purity is the source of all genuine freedom in government. I am persuaded, wrote Webster, that no civil government of a republican form can exist and be durable in which the principles of that religion have not a controlling influence. Another time, Noah Webster said, the principles of all genuine liberty and of wise laws and administrations are to be drawn from the Bible and sustained by its authority. The man, therefore, who weakens or destroys the divine authority of that book may be an accessory to all the public disorders which society is doomed to suffer. In his very first inaugural address, President George Washington said, the propitious smiles of heaven can never be expected on a nation that disregards the eternal rules of order and right which heaven itself has ordained. In his farewell address, the end of his second term, President Washington said, of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. In vain would that man claim the tribute of patriotism who should labor to subvert these great pillars of human happiness. The mere politician ought to respect and to cherish them. And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principle. Abraham Lincoln, the only assurance of our nation's safety is to lay our foundation in morality and religion. On June 21, 1776, John Adams, who would become our second president, wrote this, statesmen may plan and speculate for liberty, but it is religion and morality alone which can establish the principles upon which freedom can securely stand. By the way, it's interesting to note that whenever the Founding Fathers spoke about religion, they linked it with morality, and whenever they spoke about morality, they linked it with religion. The two words always appear linked and together in their literature. Religion and morality, morality and religion. It is religion and morality alone, wrote John Adams, which can establish the principles upon which freedom can securely stand. The only foundation of a free constitution is pure virtue. And if this cannot be inspired into our people in a greater measure than they have it now, they may change their rulers and their forms of government, but they will not obtain a lasting liberty. In 1798, while he was president of these United States, John Adams said this, very important quote, this one, we have no government armed with power capable of contending with human passions unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. What an amazing statement to the ears of modern Americans. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. No wonder things are coming apart, folks. When the American people begin to lose this sense of morality and faith in God, then everything begins to crumble. James Madison, our fourth president, stated, to suppose that any form of government will secure liberty without virtue in the people is a chimerical idea. And Ben Franklin, in his usual succinct way of putting things, stated it clearly: only a virtuous people are capable of freedom. How true. Samuel Adams, the father of the American Revolution, of course. Even secular historians call him that. Neither the wisest constitution nor the wisest laws will secure the liberty and happiness of a people whose manners are universally corrupt. Manners not meaning table manners, of course, but way of life. Alexis de Tocqueville, that discerning French visitor in the 1830s, foresaw what would happen to America if its moral and religious foundation decayed. If this occurred, he prophesied that we would see the rise of a new form of despotism. He called it an immense protective power which is alone responsible for securing the people's enjoyment and watching over their fate. It gladly works for their happiness, but wants to be the sole agent and judge of it. Thus, it daily makes the exercise of free choice less useful and more rare, restricts the activity of free will within a more narrow compass, and little by little robs each citizen of the proper use of their own faculties. Sounds to me like the direction of big government these days, don't you think? The Supreme Court of New York State said in 1811, whatever strikes the root of Christianity tends manifestly to the dissolution of civil government, because it tends to corrupt the morals of the people and it destroys good order. Well, coming closer to modern times, President Teddy Roosevelt put it like this: every thinking man realizes that the teachings of the Bible are so interwoven and entwined with our whole civic and social life that it would be literally impossible for us to figure ourselves what that life would be if these standards were removed. We would lose almost all the standards by which we now judge both public and private morals. President Calvin Coolidge put it like this: the foundations of our society and our government rest so much on the teachings of the Bible that it would be difficult to support them if faith in these teachings would cease to be practically universal in our country. And here's one that'll surprise those of you that are old enough to remember Harry Truman. President Harry Truman said this: the basis of our Bill of Rights comes from the teachings we get from Exodus and St. Matthew, from Isaiah and St. Paul. If we don't have a proper fundamental moral background, we will finally end up with a government which does not believe in rights for anybody except the state. You see, America is about ideals. It's about a vision. We hold these truths to be self-evident. Did you ever think about this? America is the only society where you can be born somewhere else and come to wherever you live. Oh, the possible exception is our northern neighbor, Canada, but it's even more true of us. You can be born somewhere else and come to wherever you happen to live in America. And you live there long enough to become an American citizen. And the moment you take that oath of citizenship, you are no longer Thai or Japanese or Korean or Mexican or Argentine or Irish or German or Swedish or whatever you were. At that moment, you have become an American. But if you're born in Baltimore and you go live in Beijing, you are never, ever going to be Chinese. You ever think about this? You're born in Temple, Texas, and you go live in Tijuana, you are never going to be Mexican. All you're ever going to be is a transplanted Texan or Marylander or New Jerseyite, or whatever you were born. Do you know why that is? Because, folks, America is not about birth or bloodlines or race. It's about a vision. Anybody in the world could become an American. This is the only society on earth where that's really true. Well, where it's most profoundly true, certainly. Almost all the other nations in world history have been based on ethnic loyalty or race or birthplace, not America. American citizenship can be obtained by any foreigner if he or she fulfills the requirements of citizenship. You don't have to be born here. This is a divine experiment in self-government made up of people from all over the rest of the world. That's why we're a nation of immigrants. That was expressly and explicitly God's plan from the beginning. If he could put together on this continent a group of people from all over the rest of the world who could live according to these biblical principles that, after all, apply the same way to every human being, then that society, made up of all the rest of the world, could be a truly representative society. If it would put into practice these principles of liberty and justice for every soul, that society could, as Abraham Lincoln said, hold out a beacon of hope for all men of all time to come. We could be living proof that if it could work here with people from everywhere else, it could work anywhere else as well. That's the original American vision. That's what America was founded on. We have something to prove, which is that faith in God and practicing His Word can break down all the sin barriers that we human beings tend to erect against each other, and there can be a just society. That's not craziness. That's doable. Now, we can't do it completely until Christ returns. Of course, we Christians understand that full well, but we can make a start on it, because any place you let the Spirit of God change your attitude about your neighbor, there is where justice begins to come. That's how just society is created. But a recovery of the moral and spiritual foundations of America, you see, is only possible if every Christian, at least, is involved in the restoration of our society. Folks, that's why just concentrating on evangelism is not enough. We've got to engage the culture. We've got to get out of our ghetto mentality, our circle the wagons mentality. Christians in America are increasingly on the defensive, and this is no good. That's why we're losing the culture. Now, why isn't focusing on evangelism good enough? Because there's no such thing, according to Holy Scripture, as a distinction between certain secular things in life and certain sacred things in life. Not on your life. Jesus didn't teach any such thing. Jesus Christ is supposed to be the Lord of every area of life. We're not supposed to compartmentalize life into sacred or secular areas. When you do that, folks, you leave the world to the devil. And we're not supposed to be doing that as Christians. Christians are not supposed to be separated out from society. Jesus Christ, our Lord, calls us to be salt and light, and you can't salt and light things you're not in contact with. You can't do any good as salt and light if you're not involved with society. You know, Jesus commands us in the Gospels to give a cup of cold water in His name. Well, you can hardly do that if you're not involved. You can't hand a cup of cold water to somebody you're not involved with, can you? You see, both church and state are ministers of God. Check out Romans chapter 13, the 3rd verse. The church is called to carry out the Great Commission to bring the world to Christ, but the state is called to administer justice. Both agents of God, church and state. Of course, church and state are supposed to be functionally separate. They have different spheres of operating, but not in terms of influence. They're both supposed to be reading off the same page, both influencing the world according to godly principles. That's what the Scripture plainly teaches. Now, past generations of American leaders obviously believed, if you've been watching or listening to this seminar, obviously believed that biblical morality must influence matters of public policy. That biblical morality must shape public policy. Why? Why? Why do they believe that? Folks, it's very simple, because laws are never neutral. Somebody's morality is shaping every law. That's what laws are. They're moral statements. You can't legislate morality? Nonsense. I understand what people are trying to say with that phrase. What they're trying to say is you can't force belief on somebody. I understand that. But the phrase on the face of it in literal English is nonsense, because every piece of legislation is morality. That's what a law is. It's morality by definition. You understand? Now look, Christians need to be involved, because either a Bible-based morality is going to shape the laws, or somebody else's morality is going to shape the laws. The great philosopher Aristotle said, quote, "Politics is the deliberation of the question, how ought we to order our lives together?" That's all it is. Politics is simply deciding the question, how are we supposed to be living together? Now, whenever you use the word ought, morality is obviously involved. You ought to do this, you ought not to do that. You see, so politics and law are obviously shaped by morality, somebody's morality. Listen to Charles Finney, America's greatest evangelist in the 19th century. Finney said, "The time has come that Christians must vote for honest men and take consistent ground in politics, or the Lord will curse them." The thing about Finney was he was never very straightforward, you know. "God cannot sustain this free and blessed country, which we love and pray for, unless the church will take right ground. Politics are a part of religion in such a country as this, and Christians must do their duty to the country as a part of their duty to God." That's because America is a divine experiment in self-government. Listen to Sam Adams, father of the American Revolution, about putting people into office. Sam Adams said, "He therefore is the truest friend to the liberty of his country, who tries most to promote its virtue, and who, so far as his power and influence extend, will not suffer a man to be chosen to any office of power and trust who is not a wise and virtuous man. We must not conclude merely upon a man's haranguing upon liberty and using the charming sound that he is fit to be trusted with the liberties of his country. The sum of all is, if we must truly enjoy this gift of heaven, of America, let us become a virtuous people." Or listen to Noah Webster, the great educator. In his letters to a young gentleman commencing his education, Webster said, "In selecting men for office, let principle be your guide. Regard not the particular sect or denomination of the candidate," notice the assumption the candidate was a Christian, "but look to his character. It is alleged by men of loose principles or defective views of the subject that religion and morality are not necessary or important qualifications for political stations." We've heard that in recent memory. "But the scriptures teach a different doctrine. They direct that rulers should be men who rule in the fear of God, men of truth, hating covetousness. It is to the neglect of this rule that we must ascribe the multiplied frauds, breaches of trust, peculations, and embezzlements of public property, which astonish even ourselves, which tarnish the character of our country, and which disgrace government. When a citizen gives his vote to a man of known immorality, he abuses his civic responsibility. He sacrifices not only his own interest, but that of his neighbor. He betrays the interest of his country." Here is President Teddy Roosevelt on honesty. "We can afford to differ on the currency, the tariff, and foreign policy, but we cannot afford to differ on the question of honesty if we expect our republic permanently to endure. Honesty is an absolute prerequisite to public service. Unless a man is honest, we have no right to keep him in public life. No man who is corrupt, no man who condones corruption in others can possibly do his duty by the community. We need absolute honesty in public life." And that's the end of this part one of this section of our Restoring America seminar. Restoring America, how do we begin?